folks, I can't believe the year is almost over. The month of December is part of my winter break from work. So while it's a time of much needed rest, usually it's mostly spent doing projects I haven't had a chance to work on up until now. And so it started with a little seed collection that I didn't get done earlier in the season. Lobelia cardinalis, a beautiful red native flower, loved by hummingbirds and bees. Thankfully, the early part of December, still the end of fall, the weather was lovely, so I was able to collect quite a few seeds. I'm planning to redo a small portion of the prairie. It's still native plants, but I want very specific groupings, both for pollinators as well as herbal teas and such. And so in addition to lobelia, I've saved quite a few others that I'll be winter sowing soon. And so the vegetable garden is pretty much put to bed for the winter. We use a bagger in the fall to pick up our leaves, and I typically put these in the beds mixed with just enough grass so that it breaks down properly. The leaves provide a source of carbon, and the grass a source of nitrogen. And the microorganisms require a specific carbon to nitrogen ratio, about 30-1, in order to break things down. Otherwise, they will use the nitrogen in the soil, making less available for your plants. And this serves two purposes. One, it continually enriches the soil with organic matter. And two, there's enough left over in the spring to act as mulch for most of the growing season, which increases moisture retention and keeps the soil a little cooler. It also greatly reduces weed seed germination. And so I've been making some infused oils to use in salves and lip balms using the beeswax that I harvested this year. And I already have a batch of vanilla oil going, and I wanted to make some lavender oil. Unfortunately, I forgot to save some fresh lavender from this year, but I did have a jar of dried lavender from last year, so that's what I started with. Now, I know this won't be as fragrant as I'd like, so I started out by muddling it just a little bit, and then I brought it up to maybe 100, 110 degrees just to help extract a little bit more of the essential oils. And I kept it on the heat for just a little while, then I let it cool down before I put it into a mason jar. And so I'll store it with all my other infusions and ferments and such in the dark corner until I'm ready for it later. And then wham, we got hit with quite the cold spell. This part of the country got hit with a snowstorm and a big wind event. We didn't get that much snow here, but the temperatures did drop below zero. I think the lowest it was here was maybe -9. The chickens didn't even come out of the coop for maybe 4 or 5 days. I had the door open, but they would take a look and quickly turn around. And it's surprising how much more feed they eat when they're closed in like that. They have at least an acre or so fenced in, and so they get plenty to forage on between grass and weeds, insects, and all of that. And it never fails. Cold weather makes me crave comfort food every time. And so I went with a pork roast. I put a bunch of vegetables in there so that it would make a flavorful stock that I could use for leftovers later. And so I seasoned it well. I even used some of my dehydrated wine-cap mushrooms from the garden last year, my favorite white wine, and enough water to keep it moist while it braised. I put it in the oven at 350 until dinner time, so it cooked for about 4 or 5 hours. Meanwhile, I peeled and diced potatoes. I also cut up some green beans to steam. I let them go for about 15 minutes. That seems to be the sweet spot for us. Then, of course, I buttered and seasoned up the potatoes just the way we like them. And the pork shoulder was tender and delicious, as usual. And you know it was good. And so I was craving some honey fermented garlic, so I spent most of the next day peeling it. Oh, no, not really. It does take a while, but I like to keep it whole. And so it's tedious, but it's so worth it. The jar method never works for me. It's probably because my cloves are pretty small. And so it really couldn't be much easier other than peeling the garlic. You just cover it with honey. And my honey had started to crystallize. It was kind of thick, and so I had to release a bunch of the air pockets. And a chopstick worked perfectly for that. And I leave just a little bit of head space for the fermentation bubbles. I probably could have left a little bit more space here. And I just use a regular canning lid because it's strong enough to withstand those pressures. And I burp it at least once a day to release the gases. And this stuff is so good. I've really been craving some spicy food. So I had that leftover roast, and I decided to toast up some brown basmati rice and quinoa. While the rice and quinoa were simmering, I sauteed up some garden onions, mushrooms, and of course a bunch of garlic. Then I added a hefty dose of tomato paste and some curry spice and toasted that for a few minutes. Next came that flavorful stock from the roast last night. And then I let it simmer for a bit. I wanted to thicken it. I also used the potatoes from last night, and that helped to thicken it as well once they released their starch. So we desperately needed some color here, so I went to the freezer, got some bell peppers from the summer garden, also added in the leftover green beans from last night. Perfect. This sunset, I tell you what. We've had so many gray, cloudy days. It was so nice to have a sunny one for a change. There's nothing like fresh eggs for breakfast. So maybe you guessed, but I'm making black raspberry jam. We like it seedless, so I spend a good amount of time removing all of those seeds. It's not fun, but it doesn't go to waste. I often use that to make mead. Now, I just follow the recipe on the Sure Gel packet, but I add lime juice and zest, as well as ginger, and it seems to give it just the right amount of flavor to make it really special. And using this low sugar pectin version, you really get that black raspberry flavor instead of that cloyingly sweet spread. And so, of course, I had to try it out on a nice piece of toast with fresh eggs. Yum. And then the weather took another drastic change. It warmed up quite a bit. It's been close to 60 for days. The bees are out and about, and everybody looks like they made it through the winter, at least so far, I guess. And the timing was perfect because I had not gotten around to winter sowing yet. So I took a day and got that finished. I'm really looking forward to redoing that section of the prairie, so I wanted to make sure I got my favorite flower seeds sown. And quite honestly, this is one of my favorite activities to do in the winter, especially since I can't work in the garden very much, and it gets me outside and it's good exercise.